was just a couple weeks ago that we were talking. That you guys you don't do a whole lot of decorating for Christmas. Has anything much happened?
At my house?
Yes.
No. Although I did see that there's a winter solstice happening at the TCO Performance Center for the
really?
Vikings.
Okay.
And I did tell my husband we could go to that.
Oh, nice.
He almost fell off his chair. He's like, what? I never thought you'd want to do something festive. But there's going to be a whole light show out there that you can drive through.
Oh, is that out at the Egan facility?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Being a Vikings fan,
right.
Even though they break my heart more often than not, I would love to go see that facility and drive through it and see the lights. So.
I myself am a Vikings fan too, so
the pain.
I guess I know the pain. At least yesterday's game was much in the other way.
It was a pleasure. Yeah, after a lot of bad weeks.
Totally. And for us in our family, we did a bunch of decorating.
Oh, cool!
We put up this year. We're doing an artificial tree. We have a one that works really hard because it likes to lose a lot of needles, just like real trees.
Right.
Overachiever. That's what my wife says. She calls it an overachieving artificial tree. But she did say, she was like, "This is probably the best it's ever looked." So with less
needles.
Less so that way, but decorated.
It was better decorated.
Right? It was better decorated.
Yeah.
The kids did most of it. I'll put up the tree and then do the lights, and then the kids kind of take over and do the decorating and all that stuff. So that went down this weekend.
I do have an artificial tree in my garage.
Okay.
And I do remember the ornaments. I mean, they are sort of sweet as you dig them out and you remember, who made it or who gave it to you. Those are sweet too.
Right.
Yeah, sweet memories.
But what we're talking about today is a little less on the decorated side, right?
Right. This one's a little more raw.
And that's good because we need both of that, especially I think in Advent. And I appreciate the way you came to it. I was really impressed it was a different way of looking at things that I've never really heard before. So digging into Mary and what it took to be Mary. If she had been a very calm, quiet, submissive type of person, I don't think she could have done her job very well. She had to be able to think for herself and take some independent actions and be willing to stand up against forces that were against her in order to even bring Jesus into the world, but then to provide him a home and some sense of protection while he was small. She had to be stronger than we give her credit for. So let's dive into it. Sure. It was Joy for the Lowly, right? Is that kind of the title or whatever? Oh, I didn't even think in those words. But joy is our theme at Prince of Peace for this season. And the joy that I got out of Mary's Magnificat, which is what we read this weekend, is the joy that she completely trusts God, that her Savior is coming to her, that the world is going to change for the better. Not joy that it's great now, but joy that God is in charge and things are going to start happening. And then her Magnificat also recalls older times when God had been faithful, and she's looking back to that type of promise and relationship for her joy. I think at the exact moment that she was in, she sang this song when she was with Elizabeth, so she was just probably in her first trimester, and she fled her home to go stay with Elizabeth, which tells me she wasn't probably 100% comfortable in her home. So I think she was probably had a lot of questions and a lot of insecurity, the way many of us do at times of transition, and yet she could proclaim joy because she completely trusted God. So then she went to go visit Elizabeth, and then did she go back before they went off to Bethlehem?
The relationship with Joseph, that had to come. And I think that they left from Nazareth to go to Bethlehem for the census.
Right.
So, yeah, she stayed with Elizabeth about 3 months, it tells us in Scripture. And then she went home again and really had to face the music. I don't know how much she told her parents before she took off, but what a lovely place for her to be able to go and hang out with Elizabeth. Elizabeth, who also intimately was experiencing God's miracle as she was supposed to be barren, and then she was pregnant with John. They could identify in a level that probably very few other people understood at that time. Yeah. So she found some solace, I think, with Elizabeth for a little while. And then she had to go back and tell people what was happening within her. And a lot of people had to make really hard decisions.
It just seems kind of crazy, because I think a lot of times it's put out as this, almost lullaby, right?
Right.
It's like this sweet little, yes, there's this, like, you have to make a decision. Joseph has to make the decision of taking her, as she's pregnant,
right,
and all that, and what comes of that. But otherwise, it was, and maybe the journey was a little bit difficult to Bethlehem and whatever else. But it's like
bouncy on the donkey,
right? Bouncy on the donkey, or whatever, because you're in your 9th month or whatever it is,
right?
But tell us a little bit more about, like, the hardships that Mary would face, or even just women in general in that
sure.
time.
Yeah. I mean, being women were pretty much blamed for anything that went wrong, especially pregnancy-wise. She was facing a very real threat of a death penalty. I mean, there was a lot of legal reason that would have allowed her to be stoned. And Joseph got to make that decision. And thankfully, he chose not to have her stoned, but he would have had every legal right to do that. And I believe that she's trusting God that this is not going to happen because this is God's son, but still, how do you see the way through that? It's so scary. She can't physically stop it from happening. She can't be clever enough to stop that from happening. So thankfully, God was already at work in Joseph's heart, and Joseph was willing to continue to move forward with their relationship. It was a betrothal, which is more like an engagement. It's another level up from an engagement, but wasn't quite the wedding yet. But he still was committed to her, and he protected her then. His choice protected her and protected Jesus, and he continued to do that. And he also was, given free will. It was impressed upon him that God would prefer that he made this choice, but he could have opted out. And then he decided to be the protector of Jesus too, this child. Who knows how much of Mary's story he believed, but he adopted Jesus, and he raised him and did whatever it took to take care of him. So it wasn't just Mary's life that changed, but Joseph's did too. He had to leave his hometown. He had to leave his country. He had to run around and look out for soldiers and those that are trying to kill this little baby. So, Joseph went through a lot as well to be able to take care of him. But I think about this Magnificat, and so often when we read it, you said it's like a lullaby, but these words are so strong. If we talk about, oh, the mighty one has done great deeds for me, it does sound like a lullaby. But then how do you read this like a lullaby? He has shown strength with his arm and scattered the proud in the imagination of their hearts. It almost makes it sound like that's what they wanted. Wouldn't that be lovely?
Yeah.
For God's strong arm to come against you and scatter you. But of course it wasn't for them. That's a really fiery thing to say, that God is going to scatter the proud in the imagination of their heart. So in the song, Mary's already acknowledging that their pride is based on their own imagination. It's not based on anything concrete or real. It's just who they imagine themselves to be, and they are about to get scattered. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones. Well, that's really dramatic. Yeah. It's not easy to take a powerful person off their throne, but God has done this and lifted up the lowly. That's also not an easy thing to do. So it's such a nice poem, but if we actually pay attention to the words, we start to understand that there's some real passion behind the words. And this is the type of passion then that would have fueled Mary to be able to face a death threat against her and to be able to pick up what she can carry and leave for Bethlehem and then leave for Egypt, where they lived for a couple of years, and then come back. And always Jesus is being questioned. His paternity comes up even into adulthood. Where did this child come from? Right, as a means of putting him down, as a means of putting Mary down, and making a judgment against them, as in we don't want to listen to what they have to say or value them as people. Just so much judgment that Mary probably faced every day of her life. People whispering behind her back, and I don't know, is she that woman? Should we associate with that woman? We don't know what type of life she lived before she came to our town. And it sounds ridiculous, but people face that exact same judgment every single day today in our neighborhoods. Yeah. Yeah, in our schools, everywhere around us, humans feel the pride and the imagination of their hearts to imagine that they are somehow better or more worthy than somebody else. Right. Yeah.
Which is not the case, at least when you are in God's kingdom, right?
Exactly. Because God is going to turn it all around, and Jesus clearly says the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And this toppling of kingdoms and thrones and lifting up the lowly, it's a sea change. It's dramatic, and God absolutely values the people, all the voices, all the experiences, and the ones without power. I think God sees as especially worthy of God's intervention.
Yeah. Let's talk about the kind of the geography. I remember you went through of talking about like where Mary lived, Nazareth, right? And what that brings in. And if you send me those pictures, I can also implement them into the podcast so that people can see it for those that are watching.
Right. Maps. They're so wonderful. When I was in college, one of my jobs was the map library. That was the first job I was assigned, and I did not find that thrilling. But once I got in there, I really started to love maps. And so I worked at the map library for 4 years of college, and I am a map person. But all that to say, when we read scripture, it's easy to get all muddled up where the locations are, especially because things, even in the Bible, change names. So they get these different names depending on who's in charge of the region at that time. And it's also easy when we imagine Israel. It seems like a really tiny country compared to the other countries in the world. So we can imagine that all these towns are really close together. And we hear about people walking everywhere, so we assume it must have been easy because that's about as far as we can imagine ourselves walking. But the truth is, it wouldn't be unusual for people to walk 10 plus miles a day, to get different places. Even I think about at the end of the Gospels where there's people on the road to Emmaus. And if you read it carefully, they walk 7 miles to Emmaus and they meet Jesus and they get so excited they walk all the way back again in the same day. So that's 14 miles. So people walked really far distances back then. So I think it's easy to assume that Nazareth is right next door to Bethlehem and Jerusalem, but it's not. It's quite a distance away. And over the landscape, there are many barriers that humans imagine are there too, cultural barriers, and besides the landscape barriers. And Nazareth is way on the edge of that. It's way over on the border at the very northern edge of Israel, meaning people there have an experience that's different from the people in the middle or southern part of Israel, which is where Jerusalem is. Mm. So I think that plays into the story in ways. If we don't understand the way the map looks, we don't quite understand what Mary's talking about either. We just assume that it's a homogenous culture. Everybody there has the same experience. But we know that's not true. I mean, even just take the state of Minnesota, for example. Yeah. People who live in the Twin Cities tend to have a very different experience of Minnesota than people who live on the edges of the state. Yeah. I think like way far north, the border with Canada, that's a different experience. I grew up in the very far south of Minnesota on the border of Iowa. Yeah. And you develop a sense of identity based on being close to the border and from being a distance from the seat of power. So I can just say that growing up in Albert Lea, what happened in the Twin Cities seemed like a different world to me. Yeah. The culture of the Twin Cities, I mean, I remember being scared to drive in the Twin Cities because everybody drives so fast up in the Twin Cities or whatever. There's so many cars. And I had a philosophy when I first came to seminary and I was living in St. Paul. I called it punch it and pray. So that was how I merged. Okay. Yeah. I would just boldly put down that gas pedal and just pray that I could make it into the lane because it was so scary. But, you know, my 3 kids, they all learned how to drive. Driver's ed took them through the Twin Cities, you know. Yeah. That was one of their sessions. And so that's normal for them. On the other hand, my son-in-law is from up north, and his driving skills are vastly superior to many of the ones in the Twin Cities because he's prepared to get stuck, and he's prepared to get himself out, and he's prepared to be in a blizzard, and he's prepared to drive on all types of road surfaces where you can see or when you can't see. It's just a different experience. So Mary had that. Being from Nazareth, her experience was not the experience of a person that might have lived in Jerusalem, for example. So she had to deal with being on a border, being where there was less oversight and less control of people's behaviors for better or for worse. And generally, I think that means for worse. Yeah. So people default a little bit when they feel they can get away with things. And so she grew up where there was probably even more violence. And we know that violence was not absent from Jerusalem. So seeing it maybe more face-to-face on a daily basis, feeling less safe around the soldiers and on her own, that would have definitely informed who she was as a person. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's important. Now, did Caesar Augustus, did he reside in Jerusalem? No, he was in Rome. He was in Rome. And that's where he set up proxy power in Israel. So that's where we get Pontius Pilate and Herod. And there's some strange overlappings of power there too. But Pontius Pilate was the governor. Herod is called the king, but really, you know, he was given a little region that he got to oversee. But his power still had to submit to Pilate, and then Pilate was still submitting to Caesar. But yeah, Caesar stayed out of it. He was over there in Rome. Right. He wasn't dealing face-to-face with what's happening in Israel. Which is why King Herod was the person that was mostly concerned about Jesus coming, right? Because he was afraid that someone was going to overtake him and force, right? Well, yes. And Herod's a whole funny story, too, because he would not have been considered Jewish at all. In fact, he was part of a tribe of people that were also saw themselves as separate from the Jewish people. So he didn't actually have a rightful Jewish claim to the throne, except that he married a woman who was Jewish. And so he claimed it through her. He was a bad bad dude. And he had a very colorful death. We can get into that someday. But yeah, so at first he was worried that Jesus was going to take his power away.
Right.
And when it got to the point where Jesus was becoming a bigger problem even than Herod could handle, then people started to turn it as he's trying to take, Pilate's power away or Caesar's power away, make it a bigger and bigger deal so they could get attention from these powers that be. Pilate could see through it, though. He knew Jesus wasn't a threat to him. He wasn't at all concerned, but he still bowed to the pressure of the people when it sounded like there was going to be a riot. So he could have made better choices, but God used it all, and Jesus was able to take that suffering and turn it into the glory that we know now.
Yeah. What about this book that you have here?
Okay, this book, I recommend everybody read this book. It will open up the story of Jesus' birth in completely new ways. This author...
And so because there might be people
The First Advent in Palestine is by Kelley, Nikondeha. You can get this book lots of places. It's easy to find. She did a really cool thing, and she went back to the locations that are mentioned in Scripture and interviewed people that actually live there today. So she weaves their experiences into the story of Jesus' birth. And of course, a lot has changed, but there's a lot of very similar overlapping experiences of marginalized people facing threats from a government that's more powerful than them, and how do they make their voices heard. So she just takes a fresh look at what that would have meant being marginalized people then growing up in this area, Israel in the first century. She interweaves Mary's story with the story of Elizabeth, which is also a really interesting take on Elizabeth, because she was married to Zechariah, who was a priest, but he was just one of the country priests that was on rotation to go to Jerusalem. And it's actually miracle after miracle that got his story told and her story told. He never was meant to go and shake things up at the temple when he was called on to go to the temple. And the idea that his wife now, who is supposed to be barren, is going to give birth, he's not believing it. He's laughing. He ends up having to write notes because the angel takes his voice away.
Yeah.
That's his testimony. He can't speak anymore. But if we just read Scripture and we don't dig into the culture of the time, we might imagine that Zechariah was a very powerful person and Elizabeth was a very powerful person. And they just different ways to view God working in ordinary people. I think that is probably one of the biggest gifts from this book, is you get to relate Jesus to ordinary people. And you see that his whole lineage comes from very ordinary circumstances. And God can use things that we might think are irrelevant or very low on the totem pole to do really amazing things. Out of this union of Zechariah and Elizabeth, we get John the Baptist, who made it his life's goal to prepare the way for Jesus, which also wasn't an easy life. So he made a lot of interesting choices too to call attention to himself. Anyway, this is a really interesting book if you want to dig into the people and the places that were there.
That's great. So let's move more into the application, right?
Sure.
So, I mean, I remember you talking about like radical service and radical. There was a few other ones that you had mentioned in there. How did you come to that? And I think you did touch on it with what Mary experienced, her experience being a woman in the geography that she was in, dealing with obviously being pregnant, and all those dangers that were going on. So how do we get to kind of the radical aspect of, and what maybe we are encouraged to
Right. So I talked about how at the heart of Mary's story is this sense of resistance, that she was already formed as a human that was going to resist what was evil around her. Because she was on the border, people could behave badly on the border. She had to have an inner sense of resisting evil in order to survive. So she's not sucked into whatever is happening there. So she is not harmed by it. She had to be able to defend herself in the face of soldiers that might have wanted to pick on her, or even just an overarching attitude that you and your people aren't worth any attention. So she had to develop this sense that I am going to resist and rebel against the evil that is trying to squash me and my people and my culture and my call from God. And so she lived her life then as one that chose to love Jesus first and to follow Jesus first, meaning everything else was open to change. And the most rebellious thing she did was bring a human God into this world who called himself the Son of God and the Prince of Peace, and was somebody that people were being directed to worship. That would be a direct threat then to Caesar, who also called himself the Son of God and the Prince of Peace, and demanded the people worship him. But then I talked about how even though we aren't called to do Mary's exact job, we also are called to be avenues of God breaking into this world, avenues of grace and healing and lifting up the lowly, and all of these radical things that Mary talks about in the Magnificat. So sometimes in our culture, it's easy to just assume that the evil that is around us, that is oppressing us, is normal, to the point where we cease to recognize that that's what it is. You know, that the oppression of our friends and neighbors, or our voices, the taking away of our freedoms, the sense that people feel that they are unworthy or unwanted, all of that is evil. And if some of us aren't being oppressed, or we don't feel like we're being oppressed, maybe we thank God that we're not oppressed. But it's so easy to turn our eyes away then from the evil that's happening if it's not directly hurting me. But we're not called to that. We're called to have eyes wide open, who can see evil and call it out for what it is, and then rebel against that. And I wanted to lift up the sense that we all have this God-given power to not succumb to these messages of oppression that we hear. And one of those messages is this commercialism tendency to amass wealth for ourselves, or build up the things or the people that we think will help us or protect us or whatever, because we're afraid. We're just afraid that if we don't do it, we're going to be lost. We're going to be left behind. That we're going to not have enough resources. But that's all built on the sense that we've got to take care of ourselves, and not on faith. So the idea that we can choose to be generous is actually a rebellion against all those voices that are trying to make money our God. If we say, I refuse to worship anything but Jesus, and I'm going to prove it. One of the ways we can prove it is by giving money away and being generous. Jesus loves generosity. Jesus was very generous with us. And it is an act of anti-commercialism, anti-oppression to say, I get to participate in giving away. One of the people I have listened to as far as learning how to craft my budget and to use my resources for God's power is Dave Ramsey. And he's always talked about, you're never going to have more fun or feel closer to God than when you can be generous, because God's heart is very generous. And so being generous is being the image of God, and it is refusing to be part of the commercialism culture. So, yeah. And then another way is, instead of thinking, I've got to use people to get where I need to go, or it's okay that the powerful people maybe are taking advantage of some others, but it's all for the greater good. We can just refuse to play that game. There are certain things we can do and certain things we can't do. Maybe we can't change every facet of the decisions that are being made that are above our pay grade. But what we can do is choose to use our time and energy to serve somebody else. And our acts of saying, I will freely give my energy away, my power, myself, I will go and serve somebody, especially somebody that can never repay that. That is also an act of rebellion, because we get to pick where we spend our time and our energy. We don't have to subscribe to the idea that if we're not part of the bigger group, we'll be left behind again. We'll be lost. Nobody will take care of us. We don't believe that. We don't live in fear. We believe that God will always take care of us. So why not lift up some people that are struggling right now and help them out and go shovel their sidewalk or get them some groceries or just welcome them in into the warmth that we have. All of that is deeply rebellious when the Caesars of this world, those in power, are trying to control us. It shows that we can't be controlled. And then the last thing I said is that loving Jesus changes us, because if we choose to love Jesus more than anything else, more than anybody else, that means even more than the plans that we might have made for our own lives. So if we love Jesus more, then we are willing to let God shape our lives. And at any moment, God might say, well, I need you more over here. So now it's time to move. And that's what Mary had to do. She had to move. When God said, it's time to go, she had to go. Might mean you change your job. It might mean that your relationships change, because maybe when you love Jesus this much, you can't stop talking about him, and some other people don't want to hear about him. So you might have to change your relationships. Maybe some people aren't going to believe what you say. When you say God is at work in me and I'm making these choices based on my faith, they might not believe it. And so you might need to hang out with other people who can be supportive of you. It is all coming under this umbrella that Jesus has come to change the world, and we are part of that. We're going to get changed one way or another. We can do it resisting, like Caesar. We can dig in our heels and try to coerce people and try to keep things the same. Or we can just experience the joy of knowing God is shaping us into something better than we can ever imagine. So at the heart of this rebellion, this resistance, is just our belief that God reigns. And that's the number one priority.
Well, and that his kingdom is going to go on.
Yes.
You're going to have your current kingdoms, your current governments, whatever, that aren't going to last.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of people feel a call to resistance, and sometimes we're told that it's wrong to be the outlier. It's wrong to disagree with people who have more power than you. It's wrong to be a troublemaker. But if we're making trouble for people who are not doing God's will, that means we're doing God's will. Mm. So sometimes God's will is that we are the troublemaker, and we are the strange ones, and we shake things up because this mighty arm of God is actually at work, tearing things down and turning things around and lifting up the lowly. So I think it would be much more fun and enjoyable to be on God's side and to experience that with the people that were once oppressed, to experience them feeling freedom for the first time. How much fun?
Lots of fun.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we want to kind of close with, or something that people can tangibly take from this?
I would just encourage people to look at their hearts and how their hearts are being shown through their lives, and see if those line up. Is what God is telling you and God is calling you to be as a person lining up with the way you are behaving in the world? Mm. And I think a lot of us are scared to follow our hearts because there might be repercussions. And I think that Mary probably was really scared too. And there were some repercussions that she faced. And she lived this most extraordinary life. And we still talk about her today. So I would just say take some courage, but do a little self-examination and see if what God is telling you is being shown through the way we live our lives. And if so, it will be a really adventurous, fun, joy-filled life, but it might be a little bit unpredictable.
And that's okay.
Yes.
That's that's a part of the journey and whatever. Well, thank you so much, Jill, for taking the time to talk through this. Again, can you lift up that book? Yes, The First Advent in Palestine by Kelley Nikondeha.
That's my best guess too.
Okay.
Yes.
Anyways, yeah. So if you're interested in that, you can get that pretty much everywhere books are sold. I will make sure to have that in the show notes as well. Thanks for watching this episode 11 of the Trust the Story podcast. If you are looking for that, you can find that on our worship download resources page, which you can see here. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us. We would love to hear from you and get back to you on those questions or feedback. We appreciate you all, and we look forward to seeing you next week.